Now, tell me something about the muscles in a cleft palate.
So muscles in the cleft palates are divided into two categories, sir. That is
Hmm.
for first category, which is for the swallowing, sir, and other is for the speech development, sir.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
for swallowing, sir, two muscles are important. That is tensor villi palatini and palatoglossus, sir. And
Swallowing.
yes, sir. Sir,
Why is
in the
tensor important for swallowing?
sir, it goes this mainly during the swallowing, sir. It tightens the anterior palate and it assists in the swallowing, sir.
Hmm. Palatopharyngeus, yes. Salpingopharyngeus, they all form their components of the, sort of, it's very difficult to say where one starts and one ends, and then the superior constrictor. So these are all the muscles which regulate the pharyngeal inlet and they push, basically used for swallowing. You are right. Levator palati, tell me about the levator palati. What
Sir,
levator veli palati?
sir, others muscles, sir, are the levator palatini, sir, and palatopharyngeus, palatoglossus is superior pharyngeal, sir. Levator
I'm not
palatini muscle.
interested. Just
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
levator palati, yeah.
Levator palatini is the most important and most active muscle for the achieving the velopharyngeal closure, and it is most important for the speech development, sir. And
Hmm.
it is assisted by some other muscle like superior pharyngeal constrictor muscle and palatopharyngeus muscle, sir, for speech development. So
What
during
is the, let me interrupt you. What is the fundamental difference between the levator palati and say the palatopharyngeus muscle? What is the fundamental difference? What is the basic difference between the two?
sir, first is the position in the soft palate, sir.
They are all similar. They are all
Yes,
similar. If you look at a normal palate, the entire muscle of the soft palate, they are all in the middle third. Okay, they are
sir.
all blended and they form the palatine aponeurosis.
Yes, sir.
What
Levator
is the
palate.
difference?
Yes, levator palatines are from the both the side. It forms the sling, sir, which is the
Everything forms a sling. If it is joined in the midline, everything is going to form a sling. You are getting unnecessarily confused. Levator palati is the only muscle that moves the palate backwards and upwards. All the others move it backward and downwards. Are you getting my point?
yes, sir.
The levator palati moves the palate in a backwards and upwards
Upward.
manner. All the others move it backward and downward because they are muscles for swallowing. Basically, they want to close the velopharyngeal apparatus. They don't care at what level it closes. As long as the food or air does not leak into the nasopharynx, the muscles have done their job. So the levator veli palatini or the levator palati is the only muscle that is moving the palate upwards and backward to hit the posterior frontal wall. Are you getting that?
Yes, sir.
Because all of them form a sling, but this one forms a sling from the skull base. Okay, it forms a sling from the skull base. It comes from above, and it pulls like the reins of a horse. It pulls the soft palate, upwards and behind. The palatopharyngeus will pull it downwards and posteriorly. Okay, that is a
Mm.
fundamental difference, and that's why when speech is being developed, the rest of the muscles literally are quiet. It is the levator which is repeatedly moving this. If you have very heavy tonsils, what
Yes,
happens
sir.
is it pulls the palatopharyngeus down by its sheer weight. So sometimes you find borderline cases get exaggerated because the weight of the palate is so much that the levator is not able to pull it up. All right.
Yes, sir.
So yeah. All right. So how do you actually, where does the levator in a cleft palate? Where do you see the levator? If you have done enough or seen enough, I recommend a brilliant operative video, microscopic video by Stomerlad, where he dissects everything, shows each component, and shows exactly where the levator palati is. The levator palati is much. Let me just draw. Can you see this line here? The dark black
Not.
scratch I've made.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, that is the tensor. Okay,
Yes, sir.
Now you have more muscles. I wish I had a different color here. All right. These fibers that you see that are reaching the edge of the cleft, can you see them?
Yes, sir.
That is the palatopharyngeus. And somewhere here, this circled portion is where you will see the levator.
Yes, sir.
Can you see
Yes,
it?
sir.
Okay. So when you open the soft palate, you see the glistening white fibers of the tensor palatii. They are unmistakable. But what you see behind is not the levator. It is the palatopharyngeus. Okay. It is the palatopharyngeus, and the levator will be seen under that in a separate tunnel. Usually, if you're really doing a lot of palates, you will be able to see this difference. Otherwise, you just mobilize it as one mass. But the levator is much away from the edge of the cleft. Okay, it's much away from the edge of the cleft. You have to dissect out what you're holding initially is the palatopharyngeus, and then when you start dissecting and go posteriorly and laterally, you will see the levator as a completely separate muscle. If you've got enough magnification and enough patience to do it, you will see the levator somewhere here, as I said. Okay, somewhere here.
Yes, sir.
And that is what you have to bring and free it completely, so and bring it in the posterior 1/3. The normal muscular aponeurosis is in the middle third of the soft palate, but in clefts, it's a good idea to push it as far behind as possible. Because you're already trying to recreate a normal, so you don't want to give the exact same orientation as you would in a case of as in a normal cleft. But you push it a little further behind and push it almost up to the base of the uvula. That is where you have a good chance for the muscular action of the levator palatii to create a palatal competence. And remember one thing, it is never like this. It is never the tip of the palate that is hitting the posterior pharyngeal wall. It is the knuckle of the palate that is hitting the uvula is still here. What is the role of the musculus uvulae?
Musculus uvulae, sir, doesn't act much in speech, sir, but it assists in it forms the thickening in the central portion of the soft palate, and it contributes in the viropharyngeal closure, sir.
No,
But it only adds the thickness.
No, it doesn't really help in velopharyngeal closure, but it is used in one very peculiar sound. Have you heard something called an ululation? Do you know what an ululation is?
No, sir.
I may not be pronouncing it correctly.
No, sir, I don't know.
You know, have you seen the they do that sound, remember?
Yes, sir.
They do it with their that musculus uvulae contracts and very fast, much faster than the levator contraction, because it is anterior posteriorly oriented, and what it does is microscopic, minimally moves just the uvula away from the whole thing, so that it creates that flutter valve kind of effect. If at all the musculus uvulae has got only that sort of role as a flutter valve, it does not have any real role in speech production. In fact, there's a lovely paper by Sommerlad who wrote about the importance of the musculus uvulae, and two editions later, he himself said that it was a completely false and it was not a proper this one. He apologized and said that there is no role for it. All right. So now let us talk about additional means of closing the nasal mucosa. You said you import tissue by using the buccal myomucosal flap. Called myomucosal flap?
Yes, sir.
Why is it called the myomucosal flap?
Sir, it is taken from the buccal part, and we take the mucosa from the side of the cheek, sir, and till the just before the parotid duct opening, sir.
Not before, below.
Below, sir. Sorry.
Why is it called myomucosal? Why is the myo element in this? Hello?
Sir, part of the buccinator muscle.
Why? Why is the buccinator? Is it a dynamic flap?
No, sir. It's just covered. No, sir, it's not dynamic.
Then why is it taken?
So,
Have you seen it?
no, sir. No, sir. I've not seen it.
You're not seen it. Do you know who described it?
Yes, sir. M.M. Mukherjee, sir. Dr. M.M. Mukherjee.
Professor Murari Mukherjee.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And popularized also by Dr. A.C. Ganguly. Basically, the buccinator is taken to improve the vascularity of the flap. Okay, and if it's used for the nasal mucosa, it is usually islanded, right? It
Yes,
has a
sir.
robust blood supply. All right. Now, in what percentage of normal palates is the uvula bifid?
In normal palate, no, sir.
I'm asking you, in what
No,
percentage of
no,
normal people is
sir.
the uvula bifid?
Sir, I'm not sure, sir. I don't know, sir.
2%. 2%. How do you diagnose submucous cleft palate?
Sir, submucous cleft palate has, sir, in submucous cleft palate there will be bifid uvula, sir. There will be, sir, clear, yes, sir, space between the, sir, muscle called the zona pellucida, and there will be, sir.
How do you demonstrate the zona pellucida?
Yes, sir.
How do you demonstrate the zona pellucida? Suppose you may, all the time it's not obvious from looking inside the mouth.
Sir, we ask the patient to, it is appreciable when the patient gag. So they, in during that time there will be midline clear zone.
Gags?
When the patient gags, sir. Gagging on gagging, sir.
Put a light through the nose, no? Put a light or a scope or something through the nose which has got a light source, and you will clearly see the zona pellucida in the mouth. You will clearly see the translucent place where the light shines through in the center. So, if you see a submucous cleft,
Yes,
when
sir.
will you operate? You see the child. What is the third? One more important finding in submucous cleft.
Sir. What?
You said bifid
Yes,
uvula. You said zona
yes, sir. And the
pellucida.
third is the
There is one more.
palpable notch is present in the posterior heart valve, sir.
Yes, there is a, in many cases, there is a clear-cut notch that is felt at the posterior nasal spine, and nobody really knows the cause of that notch. When will you operate submucous cleft palate?
Sir, if the speech is normal, there is no indication of operating the submucous
You will know that speech is normal. You will know that speech is normal only after the child is maybe 2.5, 3 years old. No, otherwise
Yes,
you cannot label the child as normal speech based on a few words. If you see a child with a submucous cleft, you need to send the child to a speech therapist immediately to start looking for all sorts of abnormalities. Okay. Now
yes,
let's focus a little on speech. Sandeep, how much time do we have?
Not a problem. The time not a problem, so you can take your own time, sir. We finish by 8.
Now before we come down to this, certain don't get confused by various names that are being thrown around, Langenbeck and Vodil-Kilner and Bardax, and then Eric Peat described a 4-flap palatoplasty. Can you tell me what a 4-flap palatoplasty is?
I'm not
Dr.
sure.
Edenwala used to be very fun. Okay, basically it's the same. It's like you take your lateral incision right up to the tip, and then you cut back. Don't go till the tip, like your Bardak flap will go all the way and take the entire mucosa, correct? So
Yes,
here
sir.
you stop short of around 1.5 centimeters and take a back cut. And now it becomes a 2-flap, but the remaining small triangular islands, they are now rotated this way to cover the anterior cleft. So the small triangular flaps that are in the anterior part of the hard palate, they are swung in a different way. They are anteriorly based and they are swung to cover that defect in the anterior-most part. Just you need to know it for historical purposes. I don't think anyone does it now. Okay, bilateral vomer flap plus a 4-flap palatoplasty. Nobody does. But if somebody asks you, it's good to just know it. And Doran's. Okay, one more question. while operating, while raising the mucoperiosteal flap, you have raised the Bardak flaps in this same case that you have operating. You are now trying to mobilize the oral mucoperiosteal flap and you cut the greater palatine vessel. What do you do?
So if suppose during surgery we cut the greater palatine vessel, sir, then I will avoid the dissection around the soft palate, sir.
So if you have cut, now where is the blood supply going to come from? This is a unipedicle flap because you have completely freed it from all sides, right?
Yes, sir.
You have taken the anterior incision, around, made a U-turn and come back, you raise the flap, now lagao the greater palatine. What do you do?
So if greater palatine is cut, sir, then other vessels like nasopalatine artery and anterior superior alveolar artery will be present. But that is not very important. So
no, everything will be cut. Point I'm trying to make is, if you cut the greater palatine, it's a toss-up whether it's going to survive or not.
yes.
Dr. Edenwala used to say he has cut the greater palatine on several occasions, but nothing has happened. However, if you have taken a unipedicle flap, it's too much of a risk. So my suggestion is that you finish the dissection, freeing the pedicle through a medial and lateral posterior incision first. Once you are sure that the greater palatine vessel has been adequately mobilized, now you take the anterior incision and free the whole flap. Just a simple way, changing the order slightly so that you don't land. I have also cut and I have lost the full thickness, full one-sided mucoperiosteal flap has been lost. And then we landed up with a tongue flap. It can happen to anybody. It shouldn't happen, but it can happen. So if you are worried about this, and especially in all these unipedicle flaps, take the lateral incision around the tuberosity, the lateral part of the incision, leaving the anterior attachment completely intact. Do your dissection of the mucoperiosteal flap, release the pedicle, free all the fibrous structures around the pedicle. Once you are sure that that has gone well, now you continue your incision and raise it. But what you said basically was right. In the middle of the procedure, if you have discovered that the greater palatine has been hit, then it's a good idea not to do too much of dissection in the soft palate, separating the oral and the nasal layers, because this thing can and will hurt you. If you lose the flap, it will hurt you. So in that case, you just avoid do just a mucosal closure and try to do it a second time. All right, some more practical problems.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you cut the edge of the bony edge of the cleft. You are paring the cleft, and while cutting the medial incision, so called,
Yes, sir.
the nasal mucosa retracts and goes off under the hard palate. What do you do? You hold it and try to pull, it tears some more. Then your consultant starts shouting at you. Now what do you do? Are you getting what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sir. I'm getting, sir. Yes, sir.
The nasal, this is the edge of the cleft palate. Okay, I have taken the incision, but the nasal mucosa has now retracted and gone. Now what do you do? Your vomer flaps are nicely raised. Nasal mucosa has disappeared. What do you do? And you all know, once it has retracted, if you try to hold it and pull it, 200% it's going to tear. What do you do?
So I'm not sure, sir.
Call for help. No, what you do is you basically fix it to the edge of the bone. You take a 4-0 Vicryl. Okay, I'm saying 4-0 Vicryl because of the size of the needle, and make a hole with the needle. The bone is soft, right? Palatal bone is palatal. Make a hole, and then you bring the vomer and flap, and you just keep the thread and anchor it at 2 or 3 points. So it will stick to the raw surface of the bone. Even if you don't get a mucosa edge to suture, as long as this is sticking by 2 or 3, don't use drill and all, please. You just use a good needle, okay? And then you pass the needle through that and take a stitch to the vomer and fix it to that. Technical aspects. All right. I forgot one very important thing.
Yes, sir.
Your mouth gag that you use.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What do you do? The patient, anesthetist hands you the patient.
Yes,
Do
sir.
you pack the throat?
Yes, sir. We pack the
No,
throat, sir.
what I mean is, do you pack it or does the anesthetist pack it?
No, we pack it, sir.
You pack.
Yes, sir.
Why?
Sir,
Why?
throat.
Because somebody has told you to do it. Why do you
No,
pack the
sir.
throat?
So throat pack we put just for first thing is stop the bleed, clot going to pharynx, sir, and it keep the tube in the midline,
Really?
sir.
What is the position of the neck? Isn't the head hyperextended?
Hyperextended, sir. Neck will be hyperextended.
The blood will come back into the nasopharynx or go against gravity into the larynx. See, we do so many things, no? We have no clue why we do it. What is the biggest disadvantage of packing?
It may compress the.
Have you ever?
No, it may dislodge also, sir.
What? You're not clear. What is the biggest disadvantage of packing? Have you spoken to your patients, madam, especially adult patients? All of them have a horrendous sore throat. Okay? Imagine
Yes,
putting a wet, yucky, bloody piece of the bandage is in close contact with your pharynx and bloody pressed by the endotracheal tube. You'll have a solid sore throat. The reason why you pack is to prevent gas leak. Okay, and it will start bubbling. So if you what is the smallest size endotracheal? Which tube do you use?
Sir, Ray tube we use, sir.
RAE, right? Ray tube, which is basically an exaggerated U-shaped tube, right? After what size is it cuffed?
I'm not sure, sir.
No idea.
No,
see, you don't spend enough time with the patient. You don't spend enough time with the anesthetist. You want intubated, ready, chalo, wash up. Nowadays, I think they have even 4.5 cuff, but previously they used to have the smallest cuff size was 5.5. What average size tube do you use in a 3-month-old child? You have to know all this, madam.
Yes,
Ratnanjali. You have to know all this. That shows how much involved you are in what you are doing. You can say it's not my job. This will tell you that you're really there and you have been there from the beginning. Okay, if it's very small, 3.5, otherwise a 4 size tube is what is normally used. 4.5 for slightly older children, close to the age of 1 year or 1 year, 3 months, you use a 4.5. All right, so you basically do the packing not for bleeding, but for gas leak. And if you're operating on a pallet and it takes 3 hours, I assure you, the first thing you'll do is go home and sleep because you'll inhale a lot of gas. Okay, so if you have a cuff tube, you don't theoretically need a pack because the head is hyperextended and all the bleeding is going to come back into the nasopharynx. It's not going to go against gravity into the larynx. Okay, we do things mechanically, but it's a good idea to know why. All right, so now you are put in the gag and you're extending the gag. What else will you do? What will you warn the anesthetist at that time?
That's our anesthetist has to check whether tube is compressing resistant during the patient.
They have to bag by hand. That's the first thing. When you are, unless you have a very, very sensitive EtCO2 machine, you have to bag by hand. Have you got that? They have to do manual ventilation so that they can make out the resistance. So when you tell the patient, anesthetist, that I am now extending the tongue blade, you must tell the anesthetist, please bag by hand and then tell me if there is resistance. And then they tell you that there is no resistance. What else? Is there any other clue that you have?
Putting the gags, sir.
That you have extended the tongue blade, you have taken it and given a nice mouth opening, but you still want to make sure that air is flowing freely. One is anesthetist says, yes, I have got no resistance. What else? If you have a fenestrated tongue blade,
there is fogging comes and there is a tube, sir.
Yes. If you have a fenestrated tongue blade, you'll be able to see the gas, the condensation going back and forth. All right. But of course, you have to ask the anesthetist. And if you are putting the pack, after packing, you must tell the anesthetist again to check for resistance, because we have a tendency to reuse these tubes. Okay, we are poor. And when you reuse these tubes after a couple of autoclavings where it is by, ETOs, it becomes a little soft. So even packing can cause a compression of the lumen. What else about the technical aspects? All right. Do you have any doubt, anything to do as far as the surgical aspect is concerned before we go to post-op?
No, sir.
All right. Now, post-op, what will you advise? You have operated the patient, you have removed the throat pack, you have checked the throat is dry, you have handed the patient over to the anesthetist. Post-op, anesthetist does the extubation. Now what? What are the other things you do? Do you take a tongue stitch?
No, sir. We don't take the tongue stitch. We put, sir.
Will you want? Sorry.
Sir, in our institute, we put nasopharyngeal tube, sir. We don't take tongue stitch. Nasopharyngeal tube, sir. We don't take tongue stitch.
You put a nasopharyngeal airway?
Yes, sir. Nasal airway, and we don't take tongue stitch, sir.
How far down? How far down does that nasal airway come?
Sir, we checked and we just it should come just below our repair, sir.
Suppose it damages the repair?
Sir, it should come just above the uvula, sir. We put
above meaning no.
Yes, sir.
No. Above meaning if this is the palate, so it's going to stop short up to here. Is that what you're trying to say?
It's just till the uvula, sir. Till the repair, sir. We put the tube, sir.
It's not going to achieve anything. The problem is not nasal obstruction. The problem is the obstruction of the tongue.
Yes, sir.
With the fall of the tongue. You understand? So if you have to put a nasopharyngeal airway, it has to go up to the base of the tongue at least. Otherwise, it's meaningless. No. You have not been observing your patients, madam. You think the anesthetist will put a nasopharyngeal airway that will stop short here? How can it? What purpose is it serving? The problem post-operatively, tongue fall, especially in a retruded mandible, airway obstruction. How do you prevent that? A child is an obligatory mouth breather. True or false?
Sir, yes, sir.
True or false?
It
is completely
yes, sir.
false.
Till 1 year,
a child is an obligatory nose breather.
Yes, sir.
They will not breathe through the mouth unless they are literally in apnea. Okay? So if there is anything, if the palate is long and it's sitting against the posterior pharyngeal wall or something is blocking, they just don't have the ability. If their nose is blocked, they won't learn to breathe through their mouth unless literally they're in apnea. So a nasopharyngeal airway has to make sure that it prevents the tongue fall. Before that, you put the child in what position post-op?
Lateral decubitus position, sir.
Lateral decubitus is not enough. There is a technical term. It's called the tonsil position.
Okay, sir.
The tonsil position, when you do tonsil surgery, you have a frequent amount of oozing from the fossa. Okay. And the child is turned not only onto one side, but the face is directed downwards. Okay, child is lateral decubitus, but the face is directed downwards in the mother's lap, so that any blood will come out. Secondly, please tell whoever is there, sister, or do not use a suction tube inside the mouth because you don't know where it's going. Just wipe out the bloody saliva and the discharge coming out from outside the mouth. Point number 2. If you have told the child early on, this is most important, that to keep the child in the prone position, post-op it becomes extremely easy. If the child is used to sleeping in the prone position from very early age, post-operative the child will adopt this position very easily. Otherwise the child will howl and crib and then put your palatal repair at risk if the child is constantly coughing. Where is bleeding likely to occur from most? You get a call from your resident. Madam, blood is coming from the mouth. You see now it is not just blood-stained saliva, but it's a fairly constant trickle. What do you do?
Sir, it mostly comes from the raw area which we leave. And sir, for that, suppose patient.
Where?
Sir,
raw area where?
Sir, lateral,
there are several raw areas.
Yes, sir. Lateral aspect of.
No. Why would it come from there? Is there any blood vessel there? If you really analyze, unless you have damaged the greater palatine or the accessory palatine, if you have not cauterized or taken care of, most of the thing comes from the raw surface of the vomer. We haven't had so much of experience, but Somerlad has said that he has had to take at least 3 patients back in the OR in the evening for cauterizing that. And you will see that the moment you incise the vomer and raise it, it constantly oozes, and sometimes it stops. And he uses tranexamic acid and lots of other drips and all that. But eventually, if it doesn't stop, you have to be ready to. That's why it's a good idea to keep the child nail by mouth on IV fluids for at least 6 to 8 hours following surgery, so that in case you need to re-explore the child, you can do it without wasting too much of time. All right. So hemorrhage is a very important thing. You need to be careful of, and you need to make sure that it doesn't block the go into the wrong pipe. So maintain the position, the tonsil position. It's called the tonsil position from the ENT. It's an ENT term. All right.